Big gaming companies get DHS help to keep players from becoming terrorists. That is an actual headline that I just read. At first glance, this might just seem like another case of silly boomers thinking that video games lead to violence, but it's actually a lot more concerning what they're trying to do here. They are working with and giving a grant to 3 organizations: the Middlebury Center on Terrorism, Extremism, and Counterterrorism, a mental health nonprofit, Take This, and Logically, a private firm that offers governments AI-based technologies it claims can identify and address malicious online actions, from misinformation to scams. There's your first red flag. Misinformation usually just means information that goes against the established narrative. It doesn't really matter if that alternative information is true or not. It's pretty clear that it's just a means of silencing dissenting voices. Another sign of their censorious intent is that the ADL called for an ESRB-like audit to give people metrics about toxicity and extremism in online games. This likely ranges from saying bad words in game lobbies to making edgy statements that they disagree with. But this doesn't just extend to game chats. They're actually going to affect the game's development. They have said that their goals are to develop a set of best practices and centralized resources for monitoring and evaluating extremist activities. So great, more surveillance now tied to our video games, as well as a series of training workshops for the monitoring, detection, and prevention of extremist exploitation in gaming spaces for community managers, multiplayer designers, lore developers, mechanics designers, and trust and safety professionals. Lore developers. Lore. This is presumably to make sure that writers don't accidentally appeal to problematic audiences, and same with mechanics designers. You don't want to have racial traits in an RPG, because if you give orcs a rage bonus, that just reinforces the stereotype that black people are aggressive. Because, as we all know, black people are in fact orcs. That's a joke, YouTube. This crosses the line of censorship and goes overtly into the territory of propaganda. They make this even more clear when they say that their goal is to raise societal awareness, increase media literacy and critical thinking, as well as improving civic engagement. Now, fighting terrorism is one thing, but what in the world is the Department of Homeland Security doing trying to raise societal awareness in video games? This is clearly a euphemism for promoting social justice causes, which is an explicit endorsement of a particular ideology. They're even more direct about this when they say they want to improve civic engagement. So what, are they going to have companies try to promote elections to low-information voters? Or is the higher civic engagement just an outgrowth of the social justice mentality that they're trying to instill in gamers? I'm pretty sure increased media literacy and critical thinking are a euphemism to them as well. Now you might be thinking at this point that I'm just reading too much into their wording here, and they really do just want to make sure you don't become a terrorist because of your experience in Call of Duty. Okay, well, let's look at the DHS's definition of extremism and see what they're actually trying to prevent. For them, the number one factor in contributing to extremism is the proliferation of false or misleading narratives, which sow discord or undermine public trust in US government institutions. Oh no, not mistrust in the government. I know, a solution to increase the public's trust is to just censor anything negative about us. No negative thoughts, no mistrust. Good plan, let's do it. They then give examples of what they consider to be misinformation, and YouTube has assured me that these are indeed false. But they claim here that misinformation could lead to violence. Here's the problem with that logic. Let's say that a conspiracy theorist claimed that Hillary Clinton was secretly a lizard person who ate babies. Then some crazy person goes and tries to kill her because of this false information. But let's say Hillary Clinton really was a lizard person, and she really did eat babies. Now obviously there would need to be legal proceedings for such a serious accusation, so vigilante violence should still be prevented. But ask yourself this, would the crazy person be less inclined to try to kill her if or because the information was true? Clearly not, so it follows then that it isn't misinformation that causes violence, It's any information, whether true or false. This shows us that the dangers of misinformation is really just a ploy to allow them to censor things that they deem to be false, which of course is just anything that goes against their ideology or paradigm of thought. But bringing this back to the topic at hand, how will this affect the players specifically? Why don't we look at the organizations that are getting this funding, starting with Take This. They claim to do work on mental health, but with a quick look at some of the language they use, red flags start popping up. They say they seek to normalize mental health challenges and recognize and honor intersectional experiences. Now, I could just stop right there with the term intersectional experiences, as that is a clear part of woke ideology. But the more hidden part is when they talk about normalizing mental health challenges. This shows us that they're more focused on having the world cater to the mentally ill rather than actually trying to help them integrate into the world as it is. This is even more clear when you look at what they consider to be a mental disorder. They say that an estimated 50% of Americans will have some sort of mental health condition in their lifetime. This might seem a bit high until you realize that most of these cases are anxiety disorders. Now, to be clear, there absolutely are people with severe anxiety that makes it difficult for them to function in certain situations. But it is widely known that anxiety disorders are wildly overdiagnosed. And this is relevant because Take This uses this specific disorder as a smokescreen to censor anything that could possibly trigger someone's anxiety. They say that the organization addresses the underlying conditions that can create and perpetuate mental health challenges: stigma, harmful studio culture, harassment and toxicity, lack of diversity and accessibility, and problematic game and community design. So basically anything deemed offensive will be censored as it harms people's mental health. I'm not a moralist, but I'm pretty sure those who are would find it at least a bit distasteful that they hide behind the mentally ill to advance their political agenda. It's pretty clear at this point that Take This is really just a front group for the woke ideology, and they have many mainstream backers. This includes some big names like Xbox, Ubisoft, Quantic Dreams, Gen Con, Bethesda, and a bunch of other smaller game companies. If you want to help the mentally ill, there are plenty of other better companies out there. As concerning as Take This is, logically is the real problem here. They say they seek to tackle the individual, institutional, and societal harms caused by misleading and deceptive online discourse, therefore reducing the harms associated with mis- and disinformation. So these guys are a British-based company that already works with social media to systematically identify problematic posts using AI, and they are very liberal with what they consider to be real-world harm. They say that malicious online activity can inflict real-world damage. It can manipulate public opinion. What? You change someone's mind? Clearly you're damaging society and are a national security threat. Increase societal, religious, and cultural divisions, so you're not allowed to disagree on social, religious, or cultural issues apparently. And influence elections. What? You supported the wrong candidate? Clearly you're a threat to democracy. And they talk about how they've done such a great job fortifying, securing the elections in the US, the UK, and India since 2017. And I'm sure there's no particular reason why they started in 2017, because nothing to my mind happened directly before that. But don't worry, you can trust these guys, they're not partisan at all. If we look at their homepage, the first slide is a picture of the very dangerous insurrection that nearly turned our country into a dictatorship. So it's a good thing to know that they're against that. The next slide is about Vladimir Putin, because they do work on making sure you get the correct information about the Ukraine war. The third one talks about how they reduce radicalization online. But the last one, in all seriousness, I do think is actually legitimate. They have AI search the internet for conversation on a particular brand, and then they inform that company when rumors are spreading that can harm that brand. I have no problem with this, as it allows companies to respond to consumers' concerns quicker, so this is one thing they do right. But ultimately, I think you could understand why someone would be concerned about implementing such a massive and effective surveillance system into our video games. I don't necessarily oppose federal agents monitoring game chats, as long as it's purely about finding explicit violent threats. Because there have been cases of drug cartels and terrorists using games to organize, as they tend to be less monitored than social media. The problem is these federal agents have been using their power to go after their political opponents and enforce the cultural monopoly, so these aren't genuine efforts. The last beneficiary of these funds was very skillful in their wording on their website, to the point where an average observer might not suspect anything, but they let their hands slip when talking to the press. Middlebury CTEC says that they are pushing all major gaming companies to have dedicated counter-extremism in-game teams. The goal is within 5 years to implement the same standards for combating extremism that social networking platforms already have. And we already touched on what some of those standards are with Logically. The key word here is standard, because if one gaming company doesn't want to go along with these programs, then other gaming companies will be pressured not to do business with them, as they lack social safety mechanisms. This is very significant because vertical integration is illegal in most Western countries. This essentially means that one company can't operate at all levels of the production distribution chain. They must rely on other companies for some parts of the product's production or distribution. This makes it very difficult to operate as a company without establishing a whole parallel economy with like-minded businesses. So even if a future administration were to cease working with and funding these groups, their influence will have already been imprinted on the private sector. This makes it very difficult to reverse the damage. There are some more drastic measures that can be taken, like extending freedom of speech to the private sector or the internet, and possibly legalizing vertical integration. But good luck getting any establishment politician in either party to agree with that, and libertarians might have some problems with it as well. The best solution I see to this is to, well, kick out all the establishment politicians through primaries, but also to establish parallel economies. Both of these are already happening to an extent, but there is a bit of an establishment even within alternative spaces, which will have to be addressed at some point. Finally, if you have any doubts about the intent of the people we're dealing with here, I'll leave you with this. When Newhouse of CTEC contacts gaming companies, he said sharing data isn't their instinct, and generally they have to be spooked into cooperating on efforts to protect users. In all honesty, we usually have to scare companies into listening to us. What they're threatening them with isn't very clear, but it's probably claiming that they have legal liability for anything their players do. Basically, they're threatening to bring them to court if they don't share their users' data with them. So getting rid of corrupt judges and prosecutors should also be added to the list of solutions. Regardless, this is a lot bigger of a story than it appears. Let me know what you think of all of this. Am I overreacting and reading too much into what they say? Or do you share my concerns? And if so, what would your solutions be? Let me know in the comments. Thank you all for watching, and have a nice day.